So I found out about this little video that's doing pretty well on TikTok recently, called There and Back Again. Hashtag Jesus, hashtag Christian TikTok, hashtag God. And it's about exactly what you'd probably guess it's about. A guy who was a Christian and then went there, by which I mean turned atheist, and then went back again. Well, as a lifelong atheist, I'm always interested in these sorts of stories. I find this extremely commonly reported phenomenon of Christian flip-flopping weirdly fascinating. Seems like every second Christian giving a testimony claims to have been an atheist at some point. So I'm interested to find out what this one has to say about why he went there, and where there exactly really was, and why he went back again.
For the past 11 years, I was a staunch atheist, and recently I had this experience that completely changed my worldview. I came to the conclusion that God was real, and his son, Jesus Christ, came to earth, was crucified, and was resurrected.
Wow, that's quite the heap of different claims you were convinced of by this one experience. That must have been quite the day. But before we get into any of that, I want to understand, when you say you were a staunch atheist for 11 years, what do you really specifically mean by that? It's alright though, we're in no hurry here. So if you want to start at the start and give me your entire life story, that's fine too.
So I grew up in the church. My dad is a minister, and he started preaching when I was about 9 years old. Before then, we went to church 3 times a week at this tiny little Nazarene church in Elk City, Kansas. So shout out to the Martas if you're watching.
Okay, well, so far I'm not hearing anything all that surprising. You have a very strongly evangelical Christian background. Church 3 times a week, and then your dad becomes a minister. This is not some lukewarm Christian upbringing. As an origin story for a guy sitting here making this kind of video right now, evangelizing based on how he used to be an atheist, that tracks very well. This seems to be a very wide and well-trodden road.
The world that I grew up in was one where you just kind of mentally kept track of who was and wasn't a Christian, who was a Catholic, who was a Baptist, who was a Lutheran, who was a Calvinist, so on and so forth.
Right, so it was a very pervasive, important element of your life. It was central to your identity as a person and to how you saw other people. It was a central pillar of your social reality.
It was deeply ingrained in everyday life.
Right, so in addition to being a central part of your social reality, it would be central to your emotional reality. It would be central to your intellectual reality. Even your mundane, going to the store to buy tomatoes reality. Everyday life. And it's drilled into you 3 times a week at church, and every day by your minister father, and I can only assume in every conversation you ever have with anyone. And my reason for emphasizing this is just to point out, this is not something that you're going to be able to dismiss lightly. Even if at some point you become unconvinced of the existence of a God, there are countless Christian assumptions and presuppositions that are embedded into every aspect of every element of your life, which are going to be exceptionally difficult to remove without extensive philosophical self-surgery. For example, consider all the stories of people who've left Christianity and left theism, who are not convinced of the existence of a God, but then find themselves mired in existential angst and despair as they realize that for them, the idea of there being any meaning or purpose to your life, or anything to strive for or care about, has been yoked to the idea of a God, and that without the idea of a God, they have no idea what to connect that to. And so they become depressed and totally confused about how to proceed with their life in the absence of what previously defined it. For someone like me, this isn't really an issue, at least not from the start. It only becomes an issue if I later imbibe a bunch of Christian ideas or similar ideas, and come to believe that these two concepts are somehow necessarily connected, or at the very least that things like meaning and purpose are necessarily matters of infinite and eternal consequence, and if they're not, they're nothing. But in the absence of ideas like that, especially in your formative years, this just simply is not an issue, and it becomes totally baffling as to why it would be. I don't struggle with these questions. I've been accused before. I had a comment telling me that I was refusing to engage with the void by expressing how I just don't have any interest in these questions. This doesn't mean anything to me. But this is a failure of imagination. This is a failure to understand that it's possible to see these things in a truly different way, free from all of this religious baggage. I'm not refusing to engage with some void. I don't think there is a void. Telling me something like this is a bit like telling me to stop refusing to engage with the God-shaped hole in my heart, failing to recognize that for me that's just not a thing. And for me, the obsession people have with what I consider to be very unimportant and kind of silly questions is very hard to understand, but it's at least as hard for them to understand me. I get that. I understand why this gap is difficult to bridge. And that's why I also understand that it can be very difficult for someone who deconverts from Christianity to actually think in a way that's fundamentally non-Christian. Because for many of those people, every element of everyday life is totally soaked with Christianity to the core.
To me, there wasn't really anything special about my faith, because it was just so normal.
Yeah, I don't doubt that one bit. And that's exactly what was so special about it. It was the default. It was what you took for granted. And God or no God, it's very possible that that will continue to feel normal through those 11 years when you're a staunch atheist. For me, on the other hand, your beliefs are just not present, and they never have been present. So normal for me is very, very different from normal for you. If I were to convert to Christianity, it would be a big, strange event. It would feel like going way outside of my comfort zone, accepting a way of looking at things that's totally at odds with how I naturally look at them, based on my almost 4 decades of that being the norm. And even if I did come to believe sincerely in not just the God and the afterlife, but all of these interconnected ideas about the way reality is, and meaning and purpose and morality and free will and so on and so on, all these ideas on these topics that are radically different from what I've had my whole life, because it just came naturally to me, frankly. If I accepted all of these different ideas about this that Christianity insists on so loudly, it's very, very possible that on some emotional level, I would still feel as if I were in alien territory. It could feel uncomfortable and strange, something I have to really think about all the time and be conscious of, like writing with my left hand, or riding a bike where the wheel turns the opposite direction. I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for myself. I can see that being the case if I were to do that. And it seems very plausible to me that in a situation like that, if I suddenly found myself unconvinced of my new position, and convinced again that I was right the first time, that could feel like a return to normalcy, returning to a nostalgic comfort, where everything's simple again, where I feel in my element again, like I did for the majority of my existence. You know, some people return home and realize they can never go home again. It feels too different. It doesn't feel like home anymore. Other people go home and realize it never stopped feeling like home and nothing else ever did.
And I think because of this, it developed this fascination with people who didn't believe in the same things that I did.
It's funny, but we're not so dissimilar. We're not so different, you and I. But really, though, I think I do have a similar kind of idea about this from my side. My worldview, including my ideas about the nature of the universe and meaning, purpose, truth, feeling, morality, life, death, free will, all of this stuff, and the lack of a God and the supernatural, all of that stuff is completely mundane. A lot of those things have some effect on how I act in everyday life, or just don't have an effect that they otherwise would have if I had a different opinion. They don't even seem worth thinking about most of the time when I'm just out doing whatever. It's just kind of how I do things. It's totally automatic. The boring, normal day-to-day of a person. And it's been like that for as long as I can remember, since long before I really cared to give it any serious focus. And so because it was so normal to me, when I finally started to encounter really religious people, I developed a fascination with them. Not necessarily a positive one, mind you, but still, I do find the mindset incredibly fascinating. It's been a long time now. Look how old my channel is, for those who don't know. And I'm still just as surprised and fascinated and baffled and confused by the mindset of the people I respond to as I was on day one. Because for me, they're so beyond my normal, and their way of approaching certain questions is so different from how I intuitively would do it, that it's like studying an alien being. So I'm not sure, but I think maybe we have sort of a similar experience here. We're looking across the same valley at each other from the tops of 2 different mountains.
I spent 25 years in a faith that I just saw as this monotonous routine. And because of that, I got to a point where I had to really ask myself, like, do I actually believe in any of this?
Okay, good question. That is a question I would approve of anyone asking, whether it's a monotonous routine or not. But I don't really understand the causal link there. Why would your faith, feeling like a monotonous routine, be what prompts you to ask if you truly believe it? In what way does monotony or routineness imply the possibility of non-belief?
I had to really ask myself, like, do I actually believe in any of this? And I could not get myself to say yes.
Okay, but was that because it was monotonous? Or what does boredom have to do with the apparent truth of a claim? I believe all kinds of things that are incredibly boring. Like, for example, I know the local hardware store inside and out, and that's boring as hell. But nevertheless, I still think that things are where I think they are. I'm not going to suddenly start deeply questioning it just because I don't get a thrill out of it. Very confusing statement.
So at that point, I was an atheist, and
Okay, yeah, but why though? Look, it's probably just how you're telling the story that's throwing me off here, but that felt incredibly abrupt for something that significant, and there's essentially zero clarity on what actually happened.
over the next few years, I dove headfirst into like atheist podcasts and books and movies and YouTube channels, you name it.
YouTube channels? Nah, probably not. Movies, though. There are atheist movies? All I can think of is, like, Religulous. Ugh.
So during that time, I turned into this really angry, militantly atheist person. And it cost me friendships. It drove a wedge between myself and my family.
Okay, I mean, it's possible that that would have happened regardless of militancy. But I don't know your family or your friends, so... Yeah, I mean, the angry atheist phase, it's a very commonly reported phenomenon. I even had one when I first discovered religion. I was definitely very annoying for a period of time. But you still are, all the commenters say. Yeah, ha 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 ha. But so yeah, I don't have a huge amount of trouble believing that a new atheist, by which I mean a fresh one, would have a phase like that, and if you were 25 years old, I'm also not surprised that you would lack some self-awareness. I remember myself at 25, and I want to crawl into a ditch and hide among the reeds and use one of them as a breathing tube so I don't have to come up for air.
Like, I used to try to come up with the most offensive anti-Christian things I could think of and post those online because I was trying to pick fights with people.
Okay, that's relevant to mention. It's interesting and all that you were acting out in that way, but it's kind of surface level. What I'm really interested in is to hear more about what your actual internal mental state was. What did you really think? Because all you kind of said was, I asked myself if I really believed this stuff anymore, and I couldn't say yes. Which is very vague, actually, about what you really thought, in what way your mind really changed. What happened within you when you became an atheist, and what was it like to be one? I don't feel like that's something to just glide past, because this is the starting point of the rest of the story, and if we don't have this, we're kind of missing our foundation.
I used to try to come up with the most offensive anti-Christian things I could think of and post those online because I was trying to pick fights with people. Like, I wasn't just into arguing against religion. Like, I was good at it.
The one doesn't really seem connected to the other. Posting random rage bait doesn't make you good at arguing, but you set them together as if they have something to do with each other. It's just an observation. This video seems kind of unfocused, disjointed. It's not that bad, but I'm just saying it could use a bit more connective tissue, and maybe the severing of some, where it's not as appropriate.
So, after 4 or 5 years, I finally calmed down. I stopped picking fights with everybody.
Yeah, that's often the case. It's hard to maintain that energy, especially when you look back and you go, eh.
I knew all the arguments and knew all the counterpoints. That question, that debate in my mind, it was settled.
Okay, so you knew all the big ones, all the favorites, any of the ones you're going to expect to hear in your typical video or anything, such as, therefore God, and, therefore God, and, therefore God. Okay, I might still have a little bit of that atheist troll streak in me, sorry.
Fast forward to early June 2025 this year. I'm working third shift. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I get in this conversation with ChatGPT.
Okay, so it's late, you're tired, it's the middle of the night, you're probably on your own. This sounds like a recipe for a weird state of mind, and you decided the best course of action would be to talk to Computer Cthulhu. I don't recommend it. Anyway, are we past the description of being an atheist now? That's all we're gonna get? All right, I'm not satisfied, but what am I going to do about it?
And I'm arguing, because that's what I do.
Oh, still, huh? So it's not that when you calmed down after 5 years, you stopped arguing. It's just that you stopped being intentionally offensive. But then you kept on arguing with, well, I assume people, mostly, until ChatGPT came along and maybe you could replace the humans and finally level up to a superior opponent.
In favor of moral relativism, and ChatGPT is pushing back and arguing in favor of moral objectivity.
Okay, it sounds like you're positioning those as opposites, but I wouldn't really say they are. The opposite of moral relativism would be moral absolutism. Maybe moral universalism, but not moral objectivism. Having said that, though, I'm very sure that you could get ChatGPT to argue for moral objectivism as if it were directly opposed to moral relativism.
Basically, my argument is basically, there's no such thing as like real morals. ChatGPT is like, actually there is.
Okay, neither of those is an argument. Those are claims. And if you've been doing this for 11 years and you're good at it, you should know that. That's weird. Also, there's no such thing as real morals. Is that a way moral relativists would actually phrase anything? Not in my experience. I'm not going to say this sounds fake, but... okay, it does sound kind of fake. But hey, I don't know. I'm not going to accuse you of anything. It's entirely possible that you just suck at this, despite thinking you're good at it.
Anyway.
Yeah, let's just move on before we get too interested in this.
I said, if you want to prove to me that moral objectivism is true, you first have to prove that God exists.
Okay. Do you remember what I said about those basic assumptions that you have from Christianity that aren't always so easy to lose when you lose the God belief? Yeah, well, here's one of them. This idea that there's a necessary link between God and things being objectively right or wrong. This is a very Christian conception of objective morality that doesn't need to be that way. You just think it does because you were raised in a culture that tells you it does. Whereas I would look at these and see them as entirely separate claims, which can be linked in some views. I guess there's no need for me to explain that any further. If you're into ChatGPT, go talk to it about it. I'm not here to talk about a bunch of random philosophical positions that neither of us hold. If you do ask it about that, though, don't forget to ask about the non-theistic supernatural ones. Often neglected, but they count too.
And ChatGPT was basically like, all right, buddy, let's go. And it presented these 3 arguments, which changed everything for me.
Wow, ChatGPT presented 3 arguments for God that were new and impressive to a guy who'd been arguing about God's existence for 11 years straight. These are going to be some seriously niche arguments. These are the hidden diamonds, buried so deep under the earth that you can mine for years and still not find them. But ChatGPT is trained on everything, so it can skip all the generic nonsense and go straight to the good stuff.
The first one was the argument for contingency. It's a cosmological argument. I did a whole video about it.
What?
Second one was the argument for fine-tuning. Again, I did a video about that one too.
Are you fucking with me right now?
And the third one was for the historical evidence for Jesus Christ, his death, his resurrection.
Which isn't even an argument for the existence of God. So it farted out a bunch of generic arguments, and that changed everything for you after 11 years of hearing these exact same arguments. Really?
Now, here's the thing. I've heard these arguments a million times.
Okay, yeah, I would hope so.
And maybe it's the mood I was in. Maybe it's the fact that it was 2 a.m.
Maybe.
Or, I mean, I'm 36 now. Maybe it's the fact that I'm looking at these arguments through a completely different set of eyes than I had whenever I abandoned my faith. Who knows?
Okay, but when you introduced the fact that you were talking to ChatGPT, you said this is just what you do. Like, even in 2025, your whole thing is just arguing about issues tangentially related to this God question. So it's not like there's an 11-year gap between now and the last time you saw these arguments. But all of a sudden, even though they're the most generic arguments possible, they're suddenly super impressive and change your life. Okay.
Regardless, I couldn't come up with an honest counter-argument.
Come up with? What do you mean, come up with? You've been arguing against these points for 11 years, but all of a sudden what? Actually, no, these are completely airtight. You're right, you know. Maybe it did have something to do with it being 2 a.m. I oftentimes can't string 5 words together at 2 a.m. My wife thinks it's hilarious when I talk to her when I'm really tired, because I talk total nonsense. I have no rational ability whatsoever at that point. Get some sleep, past Andy Coons.
Especially not when you look at those 3 arguments together.
Okay, 3 bad arguments in a heap don't make a good one.
So it presented those arguments, and I remember responding, I said, that's a very compelling argument.
With the face and everything? It got you that much, did it? That's ridiculous.
And it was at that point that I experienced this crazy, intense wave of emotion.
Yeah, you know, in fact, if any of this is true, I'm kind of wondering if there wasn't an emotional thing going on before this point. Because the way you're describing this, it doesn't sound like an intellectual event at all.
Like, nothing I had ever felt before. And it was like there was some kind of presence, and I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I know that what I felt was not normal.
It's funny that you say the word normal, because I was about to propose that maybe this has something to do with that feeling I was talking about before, of returning to what's normal for you. The feeling of that happening, I wouldn't expect to be normal, typical, because it's not something you typically do. It's not a day-to-day activity, but the point would be that on some level you want to go back to the way things were, and once they're back, it'll feel normal and good that that's how they are. I don't want to psychologize it too much, but I think that's at least a reasonable guess.
I was afraid. I was scared. and it's because I went from living in a universe that was completely materialistic and completely naturalistic to all of a sudden I exist in a universe that was created.
From how you tell this story, your brain works in a really interesting way. I mean, from the sounds of it, you were religious, and then from one day to the next, you were like, I'm an atheist now. And now ChatGPT spits out the same arguments you've heard a million times before, and suddenly you're like, the universe was created! Oh my god, I'm terrified! You flop around chaotically like one of those double pendulums. And it's also kind of weird that you would say that you were scared that you're now living in a universe that was created, when you spent the first 25 years of your life already thinking that. How is this scary to you? There's nothing new about this. It might just be the way you're presenting the story, but I gotta say it has a weird smell to it.
It was like when Dorothy steps out of her house into the land of Oz.
No, it's like when Dorothy wakes up in her house after being in the land of Oz. This is home base for you. This is nothing weird. And trying to frame it as if it is makes this story really quite difficult to take seriously.
And I think that the reason that I felt fear is because it was basically confirmed to me that there is a being that exists that is infinitely powerful and infinitely knowledgeable that you could never ever hope to control or escape.
Yes, you believed in God again. I mean, okay, that's my interpretation, at least, of what you were saying before, is that you believed it for 25 years, but you just didn't find it that interesting, and then you got fascinated with other ideas, and for some reason decided you don't believe it anymore. But I guess it's possible that that's not what you're trying to tell me. It's possible that you're trying to tell me that you were an atheist for 36 years, but you only understood that that was true for the past 11 years. That could be what you meant, but I don't really think so. I think if that was what you meant, you would have said it. But you didn't. What you did say is that you had faith.
To me, there wasn't really anything special about my faith. I spent 25 years in a faith that I just saw as this monotonous routine.
That sounds like a statement that you believed it. Plus, you said that at the point that you decided that you don't believe, that was when you started to be an atheist.
At that point, I was an atheist.
Which means that before, you weren't, which means that you believed in God. So yeah, believing in God is not some new thing for you. There's nothing new here for you to find scary. The way you're telling this story is the way you would tell it if you were an atheist your entire life, and then this thought hit you like a truck. It's a story for a different person, with a different history.
It's almost like the feeling that you get when you read good cosmic horror. It's coming face to face with something that is hopelessly beyond all comprehension.
That part I like, at least. It's rare that you hear this kind of thing from a Christian. An acknowledgement of the unfathomably horrific nature of the reality they propose. That's cool. I like this video slightly better now.
Well, after my shift, I got in my car, and for the first time in about 17 years, I prayed. And I talked to God, and I unloaded.
Next week, small talk with Yog Sothoth?
I told him about the struggles I had had with depression.
What struggles? You didn't even mention that yet, I don't think. Why bother telling him anyway? He knows.
I had begged him for a sign whenever I was a kid, just anything to show me that he was there, and I only ever received silence.
Okay, so you believed in God enough to pray to him and talk to him, at the very least. But somehow you didn't find any cosmic horror vibes then. You believed the universe was created then, presumably, unless you're really telling the story that poorly and keeping crucial information from me. But anyway, so when you were a kid, you begged God for any information to show you that he was there, and then you became an atheist, and you heard all these arguments that you're talking about right now 1,000,000 times, and that never showed you he was there, and now you hear it for the 1,000,001st time from a stupid robot, and all of a sudden this counts as a really real revelation that God actually exists, and the universe really was created, and you really are living in an H.P. Lovecraft story. You fully believe, you're fully convinced, even though up to this point you still haven't received anything from God.
But it was that moment that he broke his silence. For the first time in my life, I heard God speak.
Okay, what does that mean specifically?
And he said 6 words that hit me like a freight train, and they've echoed in my mind ever since. He said...
Before you get to that, when you say he said 6 words, again, what specifically do you mean? This is very rarely specified, and usually it comes off sounding like you're just thinking to yourself and attributing that to God because you feel like it in the moment, or maybe you felt like the thought was especially strong this time. It'd be really nice if people would actually say what they actually mean. Although frankly, if they were very clear and honest and didn't keep it vague, I don't think that would help the evangelism that much.
He said, that wouldn't have been good enough. I was mid-sentence when I heard those words, and I have like tears rolling down my face, okay? It was like my mouth stopped working, and I couldn't keep talking. I just stopped right there, and it's because he shut me up so I would finally do what I couldn't be bothered to do in the first place, and that was to shut up and listen. And here's the thing, he's absolutely right. You know, if he had made some grand gesture, you know, sent a letter down from the clouds saying, hey, my guy, I'm here, I'm real, it wouldn't have been good enough.
Okay, that's obviously false. If you can be convinced of God's existence by ChatGPT spitting arguments at you, you can certainly be convinced of God's existence by the all-powerful, all-knowing God talking to you in a way that he wants to have an effect on you. Yes, it would have been good enough. He's God. By definition, when he does something with the intention of it having a certain outcome, that will be the outcome. Why do you people always forget that God is God? You just got done describing his properties. Listen.
There is a being that exists that is infinitely powerful and infinitely knowledgeable that you could never ever hope to control or escape. It's almost like the feeling that you get when you read good cosmic horror. It's coming face to face with something that is hopelessly beyond all comprehension.
And now you expect me to believe that this being is accurately stating, I couldn't convince you that I exist. It just wouldn't have been possible. I don't know of any way that could have been done. I don't have the power for that. Man, either you're completely full of shit or your God is.
If I had been given a sign like that, it would have just fit right into the Christian mundanity that I had grown up with.
No, it would not. Absolutely not. Oh, it's Wednesday, time to go to church again. Dad's talking to me about Jesus again. Oh, God spoke to me personally again in an overwhelming, undeniable display of his almighty presence. Oh, I met some church ladies at the grocery store again, and they said a Bible verse at me. Ho-hum. Give me a break, dude. Come on.
You know, it would have been faith by force, not by choice.
No, it would have been faith by you becoming convinced, or more convinced, I guess, that the thing you have faith in exists. Just like ChatGPT spitting out a bad argument that you swallow hook, line, and sinker. Either way, you're becoming convinced of the existence of God. But for some reason, you don't characterize suddenly believing based on ChatGPT outputs as faith by force, even though that's also being convinced by something external to you that you personally find undeniable, and don't just choose to believe, which is kind of necessary for being convinced of something. You don't choose to become convinced. And now apparently here's God personally talking to you inside your head, and that's not faith by force either. But if he'd done it before, when you were begging him to, when you chose to believe in him, when you wanted it, that wouldn't be faith by choice, that would be faith by force. Only now, when you don't want it and don't choose it, and your mind is compelled to change without making a choice about it, that's faith by choice, not by force. As far as I can tell, the reality of this video is you're just gathering together a bunch of random Christian tropes that show up in these testimonies and shoving them together into a story where they can't all fit. But you want them all there because these are the kind of things you're supposed to say when you're telling a story like this, and so you just kind of hope nobody notices that this makes no sense.
There's so much context that I don't have time to put into this video.
It's a video. You have as much time as you want. If you mean you don't have enough time because you got to get back to work, maybe split it up over 2 evenings. Because yeah, you're right, there's a lot of missing context. I've mentioned it several times, and that's kind of important.
But I realized that even little moments from decades ago in my life had played a role in this exact moment.
Okay, cool, great. Can I have one example? Well, no, because it wasn't worth mentioning. Because it's probably something like you couldn't find your keys one day, and then you prayed to God, and then 15 minutes later you found your keys. It's always something like that. Look at all the little signs of God's existence that I didn't notice before.
You know, and because of that, like, it was all too perfect. It was all too well written.
Unlike the story you're telling me right now.
So it had to be divine.
Did it? Okay, I'm just gonna believe that, because you told me nothing, so it must be true. There must be no other possible explanation for whatever mundane thing happened to you 25 years ago.
So, On the morning of June 2nd, right after I pulled into my driveway after work, I prayed and I gave my heart to Christ. Truly, I believe, for the first time. Thanks for watching.
Okay, that was actually significantly worse than I was expecting based on a quick skim. I almost didn't even do this one. I thought it might be too generic, but turns out no, I don't think it was. Alright, well, subscribe, and I'm supported by my viewers. If you like the channel, please do consider supporting, and thank you to all the wonderful people who've already made that choice. See ya!